Evening, everyone. Welcome to the West Lakes Financial Wellbeing Center and Goshen webinar this evening, preparing for the interview. We will be starting. The first thing I'd like to tell you, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Denise Smalls, and I am one of the participants who work at the West Lakes Financial Wellbeing Center. My coworker, Latricia, is not here tonight, but what we do at the West Lakes Financial Wellbeing Center is we provide these types of seminars and webinars. We have 2 to 3 webinars every month, so please feel free to join us. They are all free. And we also provide virtual financial counseling. All of these services are free, by the way. We provide job placement. We provide career resources, community resources. And if you want to contact us, please email us, sorry about that, or the telephone number is there on the screen. So welcome. Just before we get started with our wonderful speaker, I want to just give you some housekeeping rules. You are currently muted, your video is turned off, and the webinar will be recorded. If you have any questions during this webinar, please use the Q&A feature. Once our wonderful speaker has finished, I will provide a post-test link for you in the chat. So when you registered for this webinar, there was questions. And those questions are just to see what your knowledge is about that particular topic, which is interviewing tonight. And in the chat, I will put a link that has the same question. So all you have to do is click on the questions, put your first and last name, answer the questions, and then hit submit. And what will happen now is that you have all of the answers, because Stephanie will provide you all of the answers to those questions. Once I have those assessments, there will be a raffle drawing. So usually we give gift cards every single webinar, and everyone is entered into that raffle. And also just wanted to tell you that we collect and maintain registration information, and we don't provide it to anyone. We just use it to communicate with you. So again, thank you everyone for attending. And then again, once Stephanie is finished, then what I will do is put that post link in the chat. So before I turn it over to Stephanie, I just want to tell you a little bit about her. She has 20 years of experience in HR operations, recruiting, training, change management, strategy, corporate culture, coaching, and leadership development, and earned a master's in human resources at Rollins College in Winter Park in 2012. She has a demonstrated track record of success in creating and delivering programs that enables organizations to translate business goals into people strategies and tactics. Stephanie is dedicated, passionate, and persistent, and strives to bring the best of herself to every interaction, task, or assignment every day. She believes that the most important role she has is to be a coach and mentor to others on their journey to realize their personal and professional dreams. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Stephanie Edwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the Very nice introduction as usual. I appreciate it. So excited to be here with you all tonight. This is now bringing kind of everything together from the first two sessions that we had on building a great resume and being able to understand what your transferable skills are and how you market those skills. And so now this is the next step in that journey, right? Is preparing for the interview. And we have a lot of things to cover tonight. So we are going to jump right in with what we will discuss. And so the first thing that we'll talk about is just some basic rules for interviewing that can enable you to be set up for success. Then we're going to shift gears a little bit and we're going to talk about actual questions. And there's essentially three kinds of questions that you could be asked during the interview process. One is considered more of the basic questions. There's also some questions that are elimination questions. So questions that recruiters will ask to either make a decision whether you should continue in the process or not based upon what your answer might be. And then lastly is behavioral interview questions. And this will typically be the bulk of an interview. Once the interviewer has broken the ice, then they're going to be asking you some situational based questions to get to learn more about your skills and abilities. And then lastly, we're going to talk about closing the interview and what are some really good things that you could do, not only at the end of the interview, but even post-interview to continue to make a great impression on the interviewer. So let's first start with these 5 basic rules. And first and foremost, you must be prepared. It's really, really critical that first and foremost, you absolutely know every aspect of the information on your resume, that you have spent a lot of time studying it, that you understand what you're communicating out there, that you can speak very articulately and confidently about your not only job experience, but some of the highlights and achievements and accomplishments within each one of those job experiences. You never want to get thrown off guard by a question about something that was on your resume. So it's important to make sure you know your resume. In addition to that, it's also about having some preparedness for some common interview questions. And talk about those type of common interview questions later in the presentation. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to understand kind of what some of those common questions might be and how you can be better prepared for those. And then lastly, you want to make sure you practice. Practice on a friend, practice on a family member, practice on your cat. It doesn't matter. Just practice. Make sure that you are getting yourself in a place where you can really, really be able to achieve the next rule, which is be natural. The more you practice, the more natural you're going to sound when you are delivering your responses. Because you're going to see later that I'm actually going to ask you to prepare like standard responses to questions. And if you haven't practiced that, you could come across sounding robotic and unauthentic. And the more you practice it, the more comfortable you get with the content, and the more natural you'll sound as you deliver it. The next basic rule is to be comfortable with silence. So there will be natural pauses throughout an interview, either as an interviewer is preparing to ask you a question. Sometimes you might have silence as you're trying to think of an answer to the question that the interviewer has asked. And lastly, after you complete answering a question, the interviewer will typically pause and just to make sure that you're done before they ask you another question. So don't think that you have to fill every space of the interview with speaking. It's okay for there to be some natural pauses and some silence in the interview. And don't get yourself into a position where you think you need to add more and say more because there's silence on the interviewer's end. Next is be confident and relaxed. And this goes back to be prepared, right? If you're not prepared, then it's going to be really difficult for you to be confident and relaxed in the interview. And so that's another really, really key element, because if you're confident and you're relaxed, you're giving the interviewer an opportunity to see who you are as a person. And that's also going to enable you to ensure you're hitting the last rule, which is maintain a conversational tone and remember to smile. especially in this space where most of us are, if you're interviewing, you're typically doing it virtually, right? You're doing it via Zoom or whatever virtual interviewing tool that company might use. And so it's really important that you are just confident, you're poised, you're relaxed, and that you always remember that they're looking not only for your skills and experience, but they're also looking for your personality. You know, skills can be taught, and you might not hit every single box on all the skills that they're looking for. But if you have a great personality and you can let that shine through in the interview, that can be the tipping point to make you a better candidate than someone else. And so it's really important that you're able to show who you are personally. So that covers our 5 rules. Now let's start digging into the different styles of questions that you might be asked during the interview process. And the first one is basic questions. So I add this in there for a little levity because it's kind of funny, right? Interviewer, so tell me about yourself. Me, I'd rather not because I kind of want this job. But in all seriousness, that is typically the most common question that you will be asked is tell me about yourself. And when an interviewer asks this question, they really are just trying break the ice and set the tone for the rest of the interview. And what they're really truly looking for is for you to have positive responses and about your skills and abilities. The one thing I will tell you right out of the gate, never ever talk about anything negative in an interview. And when I say negative, it's kind of don't say anything bad about something that happened to you at your previous employer. Don't talk negatively about your previous employer. When you're interviewing, you want to bring nothing but positivity to the interview and have nothing but great things to say about wherever you formerly worked or whatever experiences you had. Now, you may get asked some questions like about failures or mistakes that you made, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you manage those conversations as well, because technically that could be a negative reflection upon you, but you're going to do it in a way that's going to put a positive spin on it. It's going to totally turn that question on its head. So that is kind of your first kind of intro to the basic question. And again, wanting to know about your skills and so look at an example of what that question and how you might answer that question. So for this example, I am a self-starter who requires little supervision. I am also creative and detail-oriented to avoid reworking. I'm very dependable, make myself available at all times. I am a high-energy individual and multitasker, and I pride myself on efficiency and cost-saving measures in which to achieve it. I also have great problem-solving skills and am dedicated to project from inception to completion. So one of the things you probably noticed if you sat in on the resume section is this probably sounds a lot like your summary section of your resume. And that's exactly what it's intended to do. You want to make sure that you have really great keywords in this tell me about yourself question. You want to, and you'll see in here, self-starter, creative, detail-oriented, dependable. I'm throwing in a lot of buzzwords here that's going to showcase who I am and talk about the skills that I bring to really capture the attention of the interviewer. And so that's really your goal with that question, okay? So the next question that's very common is, well, what are you looking for in your next role? And you're probably thinking, well, I'm looking for exactly what's in this job description, right? But really what the interviewer is trying to understand by this question is what you could do for them. They want to understand what you're looking for and what the things that you're familiar with based upon the job responsibilities and how you're going to allow those skills that you bring to the table to align with those responsibilities and how you would showcase them. Again, you want to make sure that you're bringing very strong action verbs that show ownership and leadership and capability that is very closely matched with what is required of the skills and responsibilities in the job description. So let's look at a couple examples on how someone could respond to this question. looking for a leadership role where I could apply my understanding of the market, customers, and competition to develop and implement a growth strategy. I could shape an organization by acquiring the right talent or promoting it into the right positions. I could redeploy resources to grow initiatives instead of adding costs. Additionally, I could also handle complex people and business issues in an ethical manner. And when it's all said and done, I deliver bottom line results. So in this response to what I'm looking for, that very clearly paints a picture to an employer that, hey, I want to be in a leadership role. And then these are all the things that I've done previously that I'm going to be able to do for you in that leadership role that you're going to place me in. And this is how I can make the organization a better place if you choose to hire me and select me for this position. Here's another great example. I am looking for a position where I could assist a top executive, coordinate public relations, or plan events with a high level of professionalism. I could bring my and hardworking nature and collaborate with cross-functional teams to see projects to completion. I could also work on account receivables and account payables using QuickBooks. Additionally, I could coordinate offsite events, design public relations communications resources, and perform customer service duties. So you're noticing a theme here, right? Talking a lot about hard skills, soft skills, transferable skills in these types of responses. And again, it showcases right out of the gate, I'm looking for a position where I could be an executive assistant, essentially. That's what I'm reading here. But then talking very confidently about all the things that you could do by being in that executive assistant position. So now let's talk about let's move into another type of question, which are the elimination questions. And as I mentioned at the beginning, these questions are designated to eliminate or dismiss you from consideration. So it's your responsibility to craft your response so that it's genuine, honest, but it doesn't put you in a position or give the interview a reason to pass on you as a candidate. So the first elimination question that's very common is, tell me about your weaknesses. And notice that they always typically ask it in plural as well. So what I will tell you is a couple things about this question. While we all have weaknesses, it is important to remember that you don't want to overshare. And you want to describe your weaknesses, as I mentioned earlier, with a positive spin, basically showing how you've overcome that weakness and keep a focus on it so you don't revert back to those behaviors. Be certain that you have reviewed the job description and avoid anything that is mentioned in the job description. So for example, let's say you might not consider yourself the most organized person, but the job responsibilities articulate the need to be organized. You should certainly not share with an interviewer that I'm not the most organized person. Pick something absolutely different and avoid and kind of look for those buzzwords and those keywords in that job description so you can avoid that. In addition to that, there's also some things that I would consider safe weaknesses or faults and that are really easy to put a spin on that you could use that could be an honest representation of your faults. And so let's take a look at what those might be. And the first one is really when you think about if you're somebody who doesn't like routine and repetitive work, you like to be busy doing multiple tasks and different things on a daily basis. So that can be a really safe fault if that applies to you. And a really great way to answer this question is, I thrive on challenges and I enjoy learning new things. So I wouldn't be contributing fully and kind of using myself to the full potential if I had to do the same thing every day, day after day. So you see how you're talking about a fault, but you've positioned it in a very positive way. So that showcases how the kind of work that you would want to do. The next safe fault is working alone or working in isolation. If you're somebody who doesn't like to, you like being a part of a team and you like having that camaraderie with others in a position, this is a great one to use. And a way that you can answer it is, I'm a team builder who is skilled at educating and training individuals to reach their potential. So I wouldn't be using my strengths if I had to work by myself all the time. And then the next one is also a great one, and that's you're a workaholic. You're somebody that just kind of throws yourself into your work, and you're really somebody who just kind of overachieves on the work front. So this is another great example of a safe fault, because a lot of employers obviously want people who are going to work really, really hard. But you can answer it in a fashion that, you know what, I'm very responsible and hardworking employee who dedicates a great deal of energy to my job. And while this enables me to achieve success in my role, I've had to really learn to balance work with my family and personal life, because obviously that's really important as well. And so again, it's a way for you to create a different spin. I get asked that question almost every time I interview. And my response and what I use, the example that I use, is delegation. So, and how I phrase it is, you know, when I became a people leader many years ago, I had a really difficult time learning how to give things up and delegating it to others, because I'm a perfectionist. And I knew that if I did it myself, it'd be done right and exactly how I'd expected it to be done. But the reality is, as a people leader, it's really important for you to delegate to people that work for you, because otherwise you're inhibiting their ability to grow and develop themselves in their career journey. And so what I have done is made sure that, number one, my team knows that that's potentially a weakness of mine. So I let them know very clearly, if I start getting too much in your space or stepping in your sandbox, make sure you tell me. But I always keep it front of mind so I don't revert back to those behaviors, and I ensure that the people on my team know that they can hold me accountable if I overstep my bounds, especially in high pressure situations. And so again, that's a really great way to kind of put that positive spin on a weakness or a fault. Now, sometimes experienced interviewers might push you to give them another weakness, right? And well, is there anything else that you think that you want to share from a weakness perspective? And what I will tell you is, resist the urge to share another response and instead respond as such. I am not aware of anything that would keep me from excelling in this position. And so that's a really good way to kind of stop that conversation and the interviewer as a signal to move on to the next question. Don't feel forced or pressured into sharing an additional weakness. The next kind of elimination question is around, why did you leave your last position? And this one can be tricky. So we're going to talk through a couple of things as it relates to this question. The normal tendency for any of us is to over-explain in an attempt to make the interviewer understand the situation and not potentially view you in a negative light. The reality is, the main thing that an interviewer wants to know by asking this question is if you were released from the company for cause, meaning you were terminated for something that was a bad offense, right? So therefore, when you respond, what you want to do is be prepared for the question, because it's going to allow you to be more confident and less rattled by the question, because sometimes it can be a little jarring. In addition to that, you just want to make sure that you treat it as, this is a relatively unimportant question. I knew I was going to get asked, and I have a really good explanation for my situation. Don't make it personal. Don't fault yourself or the company. Don't provide too many details or words that could have a negative stigma, like laid off or eliminated or fired. There's a lot of other ways that you can say this, and the interviewer will understand the underlying meaning of the conversation without you having to use kind of those negative stigma type phrases. So and I will also share with you, for those of you who have experienced a furlough or a layoff, just like I did, as a result of the pandemic, the good news is that if you're interviewing right now, interviewers get it. They are currently very, very understanding of your situation because so many people were impacted. However, it is still important to position it in a positive light and avoid that terminology. So let's look at a couple examples that I've prepared for you for the different examples. And let's start with the laid off example. So the best way to answer this is the organization consolidated positions at all levels across the organization, which included mine. So now I'm looking for new opportunities. One thing that I will tell you, and I will caution you as a potential follow-up question, is if you were furloughed or laid off, and I've had this question asked of me, and that's how I know it could potentially be asked of you, is an interviewer may ask you, well, you know, once the company comes back, would you return to your former position when things pick up, if you had the opportunity to go back? What I will tell you is, even if your desire would be for your position to come back and you to be able to go right back to where you were working, my recommendation is that you share and do not communicate that to the interviewer, because this could definitely be an elimination from consideration. The reality is employers want people who are going to come and work for them and stay for a really long time, right? They invest money to train you. They invest money to time and energy to interview you, and time throughout the hiring process. And what they don't want is someone who may pick up and leave within the first 6 to 12 months of them being in position because their old job came back. I'll say this with an asterisk, however. If you're somebody who, let's say you worked for Disney and you were laid off as part of the mass layoffs that Disney did, but you were a part-time employee there, and you're seeking another job that is also part-time employment, I think it's perfectly fine in that situation to respond as, well, this job is a part-time position, and if my job at Disney were to be reinstated, that would also be a part-time position. And so at that point, yes, I would consider going back to Disney so I could maximize the number of hours that I'm able to work on a weekly basis and improve my financial position as an individual. So that would be a reason why I would consider that. But it wouldn't impact me still wanting to be employed in a part-time capacity with your organization. So I think that's a really good way to answer the question and remain honest and truthful in the moment, right? So the next one is a little trickier, and this is the termination question, right? And nobody's perfect, and I can tell you there's many people that are really great employees, but they've been terminated from a job, and I can also assure you that interviewers understand that. It's all in how you tell your story. And again, you don't want to paint yourself in a negative light, and you want to end on a positive by articulating the learnings that you gained from this experience. So a really great way to answer this question is, I was released from my last position. Notice I didn't say terminated. Notice I didn't say fired. I was released from my last position due to a misalignment of the job responsibilities. The expectations of the role during my tenure and as a result of this had a negative impact on my performance results. My leader and I agreed it was time for me to move on to a position that would better enable me to realize success. I accept responsibility for not understanding the expectations earlier, and I'm looking forward to finding a new opportunity that will allow me to thrive. And so again, you're kind of sugarcoating it a little bit, but it's a really it's a much better way and a more professional way to be able to articulate. If the interviewer has additional questions, they're going to ask. But in my opinion, this is taking ownership for what you learned and your kind of responsibility, which I know interviewers will appreciate. As an interviewer, I have appreciated that when people have been candid and honest in that space, because that shows your dignity and your integrity, and that's really important. Again, it happens to the best of us, so anybody should understand that. Now let's talk about another fun elimination question, and it's around compensation. And this is another one that can be a little awkward, right? Because the way you respond could keep you from being in the running for the position if you overshoot, or it could eliminate you and or potentially cost you money if you shoot too low, right? And so, because sometimes you don't know what and looks like for the role that you're applying for. Not every job has that information posted on the job description. So you're kind of skating in little unknown territory. And your goal is to really to keep the conversation brief. You want to ensure the interviewer knows that you would consider any offer you receive. Because once you get an offer, then it's your opportunity to negotiate. Or then it's your opportunity to say, hey, you know what, this really is too low for me and is not what I was looking for. But you always want to kind of get to the point of offer so you have that opportunity to negotiate from there. A couple things that I will also say, as you think about this question, as I mentioned, don't negotiate. Negotiation is held for the end of when you actually have an offer in hand. And the second thing is, again, about kind of similar to the question around why did you leave your last position? You don't want it to make you nervous or uncomfortable. You, again, want to have a similar attitude that this is a pretty unimportant question. I know you're going to pay me. Based upon what I read in the job description, it feels like it's similar to the role that I was in before. So I have to believe that the compensation is going to be a little bit similar. So remain calm, speak slowly, and here are a couple ways that you can answer it. So sometimes it's a very direct question. And I've had this happen to me a lot. What was your salary in your last position? Well, there's really no getting around answering it any way but directly. And so the way that you want to respond is, in my last job, I was making $20 an hour, whatever your number is. And I would like to stay in the range of what I was making in that previous position. So that's an honest and candid way for you to answer that question. Sometimes, and more frequently, you will get asked the question in a less direct way. What are you looking for? Or what are your salary expectations? That's more commonly how you'll be asked this question. It's an easier way for you to craft a different response without actually having to fully divulge exactly what it is that you were making in your previous position. This is a really great way to answer this is, I would like a salary that is aligned with my skills and the responsibilities of the position. And based on the description, I believe salary would be around what I was making in my last position. Now, be prepared for them to say, well, what were you making in your last position? Because you may get that question next. But these are just a couple ways that you can answer this question. I would say that if you have the best case scenario on that follow-up question, if somebody asks direct fashion, is give a range, right? And always make whatever your previous salary was your floor of the range. So for example, well, can you give me a range of where you were at in your last position? If your last position, you were making $20 an hour, my response would be, well, I was making between $20 and $25 an hour. So you're guaranteeing yourself that you're at least going to have the opportunity to make at the floor if they continue you in the process of what you were making, but you might also get the opportunity to make more, which would be even better, right? And so those are the compensation questions, okay? And some of the kind of core and common elimination questions that you might be asked. The next questions that we're going to get into are behavioral questions. And these are really kind of going to be the core of questions that you're typically going to get asked and where the interviewer will spend the most time. Behavioral interviewing is a style of interviewing that enables the interviewer to learn more about your past behavior in a particular situation. And this is important because past behaviors are the best predictors of future performance. Basically, the interviewer gains confidence that if you did it before, then you can do it again. And these questions are going to be very telling because they usually begin with, tell me about a time when, X, or give me an example of X. So that's how you're going to know that you've moved into the behavioral interviewing portion of the interview. So what I will tell you is that when you're preparing for these types of questions, you first need to identify your accomplishments. And we've talked a lot about accomplishments along the way, right? We talked about putting accomplishments in your resume, where you can showcase in your different job experience examples, things that you accomplished in the role. And in addition to that, I'm about ready to get invaded by my cat. He likes to be a part of the party. Sorry about that interruption. And what you want to make sure that you do is think about all the things that you've done. Make sure you're also thinking about all those transferable skills, right? And make that part of your narrative. But you'll want to think about kind of every different thing that you've accomplished and all the great things that you've done in a position. And as you're crafting these stories, I refer to them as your success stories, right? It's the things that you're really proud of, things that you achieved or overcame or accomplished, and throughout the course of your career journey. And you don't want to just think about your last position. You want to think about your entire career journey. And sometimes we get hung up and we focus on just our last position. And so it's really important for you to think about way back, right? Think about, former positions that you had, and if you can remember kind of highlights from performance reviews that you received. And those are great starters for building these success stories. When you think about the skills, right? And again, we talked a lot about kind of all the hard skills, soft skills, transferable skills during our last session together. Interviewers are going to look for these skills, again, that align with the skills that are needed for the position. So the first thing that you want to do, like I've shared with you, not only when you're thinking about before you post your resume for the job, same thing is in the interview. You want to make sure that you've reviewed that job description and you're looking for those transferable skills or those highlighted skills that are really important and called out in the job responsibilities or the skills requirements. And you want to try and craft some success stories that include and showcase how you were able to display those types of skills in your experiences. Some of the most common transferable skills, and we covered some of these last week, are what you see here. So judgment. That you are able to make informed judgments and kind of think on your feet. And results ensures that you have high levels of execution and that you understand the importance of achieving results and you're able to articulate how you've achieved results. Communication, we talked a lot about communication last week. There's all kinds of different communication skills that you can highlight, but basically that you're able to communicate in a clear and logical manner. Analysis and planning. So it shows that you're able to analyze critical issues, that you're able to prioritize, that you can plan and use logic and business tools to achieve results. Management, we talked a lot about management and different things that you could manage. You can manage people, processes, projects, tasks, etc. And then adaptability. So being able to show that you're creative and flexible and that you can shift priorities and be able to handle new skills and new complexities of different projects or tasks within your roles. So these are all things that you want to look for, but don't forget to include the whole list of transferable skills that we talked about 2 weeks ago as well. And always just make sure that you've got some really great example that highlights how you did these things and how you were able to bring these things to life. So when you're crafting your success stories, you're going to use the S.T.A.R method, and you are going to show that you are a star through that. So think about what projects you've led, teams you've been a part of, what you accomplished during those times, what was your role in taking ownership or the things that you specifically did. And you'll want to showcase your abilities in a very wide range of areas. Again, using as many of those transferable skills as possible in your example. And you want to make the story a reflection of your efforts. emphasize what you did. This is a time for you to really talk all about me, and be proud of what you've done and speak highly of your accomplishments. And I know it might sometimes seem counterintuitive that, it might, your mom told you not to be a braggart, right? But this is the time for you to brag about the things that you did and what you were able to achieve and accomplishment. So you're going to use a lot of I statements. And so when you think about the STAR methodology, again, you're going to think about first, what was the situation? 1 to 2 sentences, and you are going to describe what the event was or the situation. You're going to talk about what happened. How did this come about? Who was involved? What was the main issue? Next is you're going to talk about the task. And then, so this is really about what did you have to complete? What were the challenges or constraints? Did you have deadlines or issues with cost? And really be able to describe what your responsibility was, and what you did and what you were going to do to solve the problem. You also may want to include, was this self-initiated? Or did someone assign you this task? Because that can show ownership and leadership. The next thing is action. So now you're going to want to describe the specific actions that you took to complete the task. And these should highlight all those desirable traits that are within the job description that the interviewer is going to be looking for. What did you do? What was how did you personally respond, or how did you personally manage the situation? Then what did you do next? So you really want to be able to tell a very succinct narrative on the actions that you took. And then lastly is all about the results. You want to talk about what happened and how you resolved the situation and what the end result was. And wherever possible, you want to include quantifiable results. So if there is a metric associated with the result, you want to make sure that you share that and help articulate and paint that picture for the interviewer. So let's look at a couple examples. The first one, again, and I'm using the tell me about a time when you had to solve a problem. So that lead into the question, tell me about a time, you know that you're now going to be asked a situational question. And this is all about solving a problem. So in this example, the situation, delivery trucks were sitting idle, delaying customer orders due to the fact that operating costs had exceeded the operating budget. Interviewer now knows is that we ran out of money. Like, we were spending way more money than we had budgeted, and therefore we couldn't continue delivering as we needed to. So the next, as the task is concerned, my leader assigned me to lead a project focused on determining ways to improve our operating costs so we could restart delivery operations, expedite the delayed deliveries, and prevent future delivery issues. Now for the action. I reviewed all of the operating costs, identified savings in individual categories, and implemented processes to realize savings. The result. The most significant savings I achieved was converting the truck fleet to all diesel fuel, reducing fuel costs by 25%. The fuel cost savings enabled the company to increase the number of trucks delivering products to the customers on a daily basis, ensuring on-time delivery and optimizing the fleet and increasing sales. So you can see how it's broken down into the 4 parts, and you're able to very succinctly and very quickly kind of tell the story on how you were able to solve this problem and what the situation was. You're able to showcase that you were able to save the company money and also get all the delivery operations back on track. And if the interviewer wants more information, they'll ask. They'll ask for more specifics, but you want to be as concise as possible and be as, succinct in the narrative that you provide. So here's another example. Same question, tell me about a time when you had to solve a problem. Upon joining a new team in the organization, I learned one of the sales divisions in the company was underperforming, and it slipped out of the top 10 in the nation at the start of the 4th quarter. As the new leader of the team, it was my responsibility to determine the root cause for the slip in sales and get the now underperforming division back on track. I led a sales planning retreat to uncover issues and then divided the division sales representatives into teams. I identified which accounts could potentially close before the end of the quarter, and I developed a plan to meet those profit goals. I also directed each team to put together a tactical plan to win new business while asking for buy-in from each sales rep. As a result, by the end of the fourth quarter, the division surpassed the overall sales plan. Every single sales rep hit their goal. Some topped it by up to 100%. The combined sales team production exceeded 226% of the target quota, and the sales division was recognized as one of the top 4 teams in the country. So again, you're seeing a lot of keywords. You're showcasing your leadership. You're showcasing that you took ownership of the process and that you are able to be a problem solver because you're determining the root cause. You showcased your ability to lead a team because you're talking about how you planned this retreat and that you worked together as a team to determine how you were going to get back on track. You show your leadership skills by talking about what you directed the team to do in terms of putting together a tactical plan. And then lastly, you're sharing the results and the things that you achieved from a success measures perspective. So another really great example of how you can articulate how you solved a problem. What I want to do now is just kind of show you some other common behavioral interview questions that you will likely or potentially get asked. So tell me about a time when you went above and beyond the call of duty. So they're trying to understand kind of the things that you might have done that were outside of the scope of your role and how you took ownership at a higher level and did something really impactful for the company. Give me an example of a time when you had a conflict with one of your fellow team members. So this is where, again, could be fishing a little bit for you to share a negative story, which you will have to talk about the conflict, but you always want to position the conflict in a way that doesn't paint you in a negative light or speak poorly of a former team member. And they want to see how you deal and manage with conflict and how you are able to resolve issues in a way that's productive and that makes you a good team player. Tell me about a time when you had to make a difficult decision in your last job. Tell me about a time when you experienced a failure on the job. Tell me about a time when you were working on a project and had something unexpected occur that caused you to have to pivot your plans and move in another direction. This shows your ability to think on your feet and be able to manage change, which is really important for organizations to show that you have those skills and abilities. And tell me about a time when you made a mistake or had an error in judgment. These are very common behavioral questions. So it's a really, really great idea to be prepared to answer every single one of these on this list, as well as the tell me about a time when you had to solve a problem. And as you're thinking through how you would respond to these questions, these are some really great tips for creating these awesome success stories that you're going to build. You want to think about, these are great examples. When did you save the company money? Solve a difficult workplace issue. Develop a new procedure. Design a new program. Maybe you received some special recognition. Did you train a new employee? Did you serve on a special project team? Maybe you had to learn something on the fly, something that was outside of the scope of your role, but you did it in an effort to help out or fill a gap. And how did you maybe do some things that helped other people's performances? So these are the things that you want to, again, reflect back on all of the experiences that you've had in your job. And these are great ways to craft stories around those different accomplishments that you have achieved throughout the course of your career. So we've talked about kind of those basic questions, which is all about, as I mentioned, creating kind of that elevator speech, that 30 to 60 second talk around some of those questions around who you are, what you're looking for in your next position, etc. We've talked about some of the elimination questions. And again, that's another great opportunity for you to have a very kind of solid elevator speech for those questions. And now we've kind of walked through the behavioral interview questions. So at this point, we're now at typically when you're going to start, the interviewer will start closing out the interview. So let's talk about some best practices to ensure that you're really prepared to close the interview successfully and really leave the interviewer feeling really great about you and your candidacy for the position. So the first thing that you want to make sure that you are prepared to do is ask questions. The last 5 to 10 minutes of an interview is typically reserved for the interviewer to turn the interview over to you and enable you to have the opportunity to ask some questions about the company, the role, or the position. What I will tell you is that you should always have 2 to 3 questions prepared. And some of them may get answered during the course of your dialogue with the interviewer. And that's okay, because you'll always have a couple more available to pose to the interviewer. What you want to avoid are questions that you could have gotten the information on your own. Or questions that would require the interviewer to divulge confidential information about the company. In addition to that, the last thing, you definitely, as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to ask questions at this time about salary, benefits, flexible work arrangements, etc. This isn't the time or the place to ask those questions. Those questions can be answered again once you have that offer in hand. What I would recommend is that in order to prepare you to ask really good questions and to ensure that you're not asking questions where the interviewer is going to think, man, if you had done a little research, you could have answered that question on your own, is you want to always do a little research on the company prior to your interview. Spend 15 to 20 minutes, go to their website and find a link on their website that is typically labeled about. Pretty much every company has an about section of their website. It's usually at the very bottom. Sometimes it's at the top, but there's typically always an about section. And that about section typically houses information like the size of the company, what the company's focus is. It might talk about company culture. It will certainly talk about what the company stands for and maybe what the company does. Sometimes, I've applied for jobs with companies and I'm like, I'm not really sure I totally understand what this company does based upon what the job description says. So I use that about, information as my cheat sheet. So I can truly understand more about what the company is all about. So this enables you to do the research and understand this is information that I have, but it can also help you to formulate a follow-up question. Hey, I saw this information in your about section, and I was wondering if you could tell me more and explain what was meant by this in your about section. So it shows that you've done your research and your homework and that you really have interest in the company, but you're also wanting to find out more. In addition to that, you always want to inquire about next steps. After you've asked questions, you want to inquire about next steps. So can you describe to me what the next steps in the process are for this position? That's going to enable you to level set with the interviewer on, are there more interviews that I'm going to have to go through? And if so, what the timing might be when I'm notified that there's going to be another interviewer. Because I can assure you that after you complete this first interview, you're typically going to be waiting to hear what's next. And you want to have your own kind of benchmark from a timing perspective, so you're not stressing about it. If they say, hey, you know what, we've got 10 other people we're talking to over the next 2 weeks, and it's going to take us a little bit of time to get through that. So you probably won't hear back from us for another 10 days. Now okay, I can be calm until I hear back from them. And then maybe after 11 days, I might then want to send a follow-up email. Hey, I just wanted to check in. And you mentioned that it would take you about 10 days and just wanted to see where you're at in the process. If there's any information that you need from me at this time, I'd be happy to share that. I'm looking forward to hearing back from you. So it kind of gives you a barometer on when it's okay to check in with the interviewer. And in addition to that, the last thing that you want to make sure that you absolutely ask from a question perspective if you don't have the information. If you are not confident that you know how to contact the person that you are interviewing with, make sure that you have their email address. This is really important because it is very, very important that you follow an interview with a thank you email. I would typically say a thank you note. Personalized, handwritten is always better. But in this time where many interviews are being done via Zoom or some other, virtual interviewing platform, and many people are not working in the offices, and absolutely a thank you email is perfectly acceptable. And you always want to make sure that you send that thank you within 24 to 48 hours of completing the interview. And it can be very simple. It is a matter of, thank you so much for taking the time yesterday to share with me your thoughts and perspectives on the role and to give me more information about the company. I really enjoyed our conversation and am very excited about the potential of joining your organization. I look forward to hearing back from you soon on potential next steps. It can be 2 to 3 sentences, very short and sweet, but you're showing your continued interest in the position. You're showing your gratitude for them spending time getting to know you and for considering you in the process. Some common questions that you can ask of interviewers. So you're not trying to kind of think of questions on your own. These are some of the ones that I use that have been really helpful, and it's enabled me to gain some additional insights. Why is the role open? In many cases, the interviewer will share this with you right up front. But if they didn't kind of explain why the position is open, then you always want to ask, just so you understand, is it a newly created? Did the person that was in the position before the organization? Or did they move on to another position within the organization? Because it can help you kind of gain some framework around what to expect should you receive the role. Am I going to have somebody within the organization that's going to be able to train me and me have expertise in the role? And am I going to be kind of joining the organization in this position, and I might be flying a little blind for a little bit and trying to figure it out on my own? But it's important for you to kind of have some understanding of why the position is open. Next is, what are the top 3 priorities for someone in this role after onboarding? So this gives you an opportunity to show the interviewer, hey, I want to understand what you're going to expect of me right out of the gate. After I get on board and I learn the organization and I learn the people, then what are the top 3 things that you're going to want me to focus on? It shows your tremendous interest in the position. And you're, again, being in a more forward-thinking fashion that, hey, I have confidence that I can do this job and I'm going to get it. So I want to know what I'm going to be working on once I do get in there. Another one that very similarly, just in a kind of opposite questioning pattern is, what is the biggest challenge for someone entering the role? So you want to kind of know what you're walking into, and also shows the interviewer that you're thinking insightfully and thoughtfully about, I understand that every position is going to have its challenges. And so I'd like to understand from your perspective, what is that roadblock that I might hit after I onboard with the organization that I need to be prepared for? How would you describe the culture of the organization? If I haven't gotten this question answered from the interviewer, I always ask this. I will tell you that as much as you're being interviewed by someone, you need to approach your job search when you have the opportunity to speak with people in the organization as you're interviewing them as well. Right? You want to work for a company that aligns with who you are from a values perspective, and that is an organization that has a culture that you can thrive in and that you can feel valued and appreciated. And so this is a really important way for you to get a better and more clearer understanding. I will tell you honestly and candidly, I've had people describe to me cultures of their organizations, and it hasn't painted a very pretty picture sometimes. Now, the way they typically answer is, we know we've got work to do, and we know that we are trying to improve the culture of the organization, and here's all the steps that we're taking to do that. But right now it's a little messy, and we want you to understand that should you get the opportunity to join the organization. And then as a candidate, it's up to me to decide, am I ready to take that on? And is that really aligning with what I'm looking for from a position perspective? That's a really, really great question to ask. What are the most important characteristics for someone to possess to achieve success in the role? This is also another way for you to get the interviewer to share with you what behaviors or skills that they might want and need that is going to enable you to realize success. This is a really great question to ask in your first interview, and pay very close attention to the words that they use and how they respond to this. Because should you get asked back for a second interview, if there is a second interview in the process, you can then prepare answers to questions, or as part of your narrative, when the interviewer asks, tell me a little bit about yourself, you can pepper in these characteristics or behaviors into your responses. So you're already coming out of the gate talking about how you have these characteristics that another person in the organization has already shared with you is really important for you to be successful in the company and in the role. And then lastly, what does success look like and how do you measure it? So this is a really good, insightful question for you to ask that you are already out of the gate wanting to know, hey, I want to understand what your definition of success is. This is a really good question to ask of the people leader. So many times you'll interview first with a recruiter, and then if the recruiter likes you, then they're going to hand you off to an interview with the people leader. This is a great question for the people leader, the person that you would be reporting to. I want to know from your perspective, you who would be my boss, how do you define success? And then how do you measure it? So you know what you're going to be held accountable for, and then how they're going to evaluate you against those measures. I have a question. Is it okay to negotiate a salary if the job is at high demand? I would, again, if you're in the interview stage and this is the initial interview, I would say you should not negotiate salary. You should wait until you get to that point where you actually get an offer. And then if you feel that the salary is not with what you expected, that's when you're going to negotiate. And that's when you can overshare with the potential employer, hey, this is really what I was expecting because, for whatever reasons, right? And there's all kinds of reasons that you can have to do that as well. I would highly recommend, especially if you're applying for a position that's maybe not within in an area where you worked before, where you have some kind of understanding of what the salary range might be, do a little salary research. There's a lot of websites out there. Number one, LinkedIn LinkedIn and Indeed are really great ways. You can search salaries and common salaries by job title on LinkedIn and Indeed. In addition to that, there's a website called salary.com. So if it's a position that I've applied for, I'm always going out there. If I'm not unsure of what the salary range might be, I'm out there looking and doing a little research. And it allows you to drill down by the job title, the job responsibilities, as well as the geographical area. And hopefully, Bernadette, that answers your question. So now let's look at how we wrap everything up, okay? So in conclusion, the interview is the opportunity for you to sell yourself. That is the whole point of you getting this opportunity to speak to someone live, to share your story, and to tell your narrative about your experience. So make sure that you're prepared to sell yourself and really tell them all the great things about you. You want to be likable. It is the X factor. You want to act like a guest at all times. And this is obviously if you're interviewing on site. Some of these are more applicable to if you actually are doing a live interview. Act as a guest at all times. This is really about be kind, right, to the receptionist. Say hello to people as you're passing them in the hallways. And always treat the environment as you're a guest in their world, right? Have a positive attitude towards the interviewer and the process. Show your excitement about being in the consideration set for the position. You always want to be a true professional. And what I mean by this, this can be across in a lot of different ways. First of all, it can be in the words you choose. Believe it or not, I've had people swear in interviews when I've interviewed people, and that to me is a big turnoff. Unless they immediately say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I said that," because sometimes it's a slip of the tongue. But if they, obviously you want to make sure that you're choosing the right words, that you want to make sure that you show up dressed properly, or even for the Zoom interview, you want to be dressed properly and look professional and kind of look the part. Again, don't negotiate the job when you don't even know if it will be yours to negotiate. Don't bring problems into the interview. Problems and negativity into the interview process is absolutely a deal breaker. And again, attire, etiquette, body language are as important or just as important as what's being said. So having that smile, having a genuine tone, showing that you're confident and poised and that you have presence. Those are all the things that are really going to stand out and allow you to shine in the interview process. Listen intently and do not interrupt. Okay. In many cases, the interviewer likes to talk. And in some cases, and you really want to be able to read the situation and kind of, you want to mimic or follow the pace and the kind of behaviors of the interviewer. So sometimes I've been in interviews where the interviewer is very fast-paced and they're just asking me question after question after question after question. And so that is where I know I maybe need to answer in a more expedited fashion as well, so they can get on to their next question. In other cases, the interviewer wants to talk a lot about themselves or the job or the position. And it's my job to sit back and listen and nod and smile and show positive body language to what they're describing to me, and allow them to continue the dialogue until they're ready to actually ask me a question. Again, you want to make sure that you're prepared to answer behavioral questions with concise examples that showcases your accomplishments. And lastly, you want to end on a high note. Always end by thanking the interviewer. Thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure getting to know you. I really appreciate you including me in the consideration set for this position, and I look forward to hearing from you soon on what next steps would be. And again, that's pretty much the same thing that you're going to say in a thank you email, but it's important to acknowledge that during the interview process as well, and be just very gracious for the time they spent with you, considering you for a candidate for the position. So now for your calls to action. So for next week, or in 2 weeks when we do our next session, we're going to do mock interviews. And so there's things that you want to be prepared for. First is your elevator speech on all of the questions that you see listed below. And I am going to send this PowerPoint to Denise when we're done this evening. So she will be able to, or Latricia will be able to send it to everybody that attended the session this evening. And so you don't have to worry about kind of writing all this stuff down, because you'll have the presentation so you can see what the calls to action are there. But you want to be prepared to answer all of these questions, because they just might be asked of you during your mock interview. And then you want to prepare a succinct, concise success story for every one of those common behavioral interview questions that I shared with you earlier in the presentation when we were going through the behavioral questions. Okay, so that's your homework, to be prepared for your mock interview. And lastly, I just wanted to share with you, oh, I got a question, hold please. What is the correct way to answer, tell me about job experiences? Do I describe chronological job experiences? 100%. Sometimes interviewers will ask, walk me through your resume. Tell me about kind of your job experiences. And in those cases, what I don't do, I don't go through my resume in complete detail exactly as I have it described in the resume. What I do is I will start with I actually go in reverse, in chronological order. Yes, not in reverse chronological. So I start with, for me personally, I spent 23 years at Darden. So I start out with, hey, my first role at Darden was 23 years ago. And I worked in operations with Bahama Breeze. And then I tell my story from there and job moves that I made along the way. And what I focus on is talking more about what compelled me to make a different job move, or why I was interested in the decisions that I made in my career journey, versus going line by line through all the things that I accomplished in my resume that I already explained in my resume, because they have that. It's more about being able to tell a more concise version of your job history in chronological order, but more importantly, showcasing and highlighting why you made career moves and decisions in your career journey, and being able to articulate that information. So the last thing I want to leave you with, and again, I want to show you these really quickly, but this is something I just included a couple of additional resources because I think this is really important information to have, not only in preparation for the mock interviews next in a couple of weeks when we do that session, if you intend to participate in that, but also just for any interviews that you may have coming up. I've prepared this interview preparation guide that this will be a really great resource. And again, it's embedded in the PowerPoint for you to review. So it talks about, again, a lot of the things that I discussed this evening about doing research on the company, presenting yourself, how, etiquette for interviews, preparing answers to questions, and just other general interview tips that I think will be very helpful for you as you prepare yourself, not only, again, for the mock interviews, but also for any interviews that you might have from here on out. So that concludes our time tonight. And I am going to turn it back over to Denise.